Okay, it's Thursday night, and tonight we're going to learn all about sequins. And so there's different types of sequin fabric, different types of sequins. We're going to learn how to sew them, how to cut them out. So I love to use sequin fabric, and because, you know, I'm an ex-ballroom dancer and I just love my bling. So I have all kinds of sequin fabrics. There's basically two types. There's the sewn on and there's the glued on. So first of all, let's talk about the sewn on, and there's different varieties of that. This is one, it's sewn. This one is sewn on to a piece of chiffon, and it's using little tiny sequins. These are small. This is on a piece of chiffon and it's sewn with black thread from the back, and it's sewn on with a chain stitch. So, and there are always flaws in sequin fabric, and that's okay. That's part of the charm of it. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this piece, but I will find something. This is my new, I love this fabric. This I call mermaid fabric. These are sewn onto a piece of a thick knit fabric. This is called mermaid fabric because all of the sequins are in the same direction, but they're two-sided, and therefore you can make them either that flat black color or the pink. I was going to make a dance blouse out of this till I realized that people cannot stop playing with it because they're always doing this, and I did not want people coming up to me and decorating my blouse. But this is a nice thick fabric. This also would be great for like decorator pillows, which is what I might do it. It's fairly thick fabric. And you can tell what the background fabric by looking at the selvage here. And this is it's just a knit, a single knit, jersey knit is what it's sewn onto. And then you can see the thread on the back. And it has stretch in one direction, but not in both. So you have to keep in mind that a lot of times sequin fabric has got a nap to it. So when you are cutting out, say if you were cutting out a blouse, you would have to cut the pieces in this one is like the mermaid fabric. You're going to have to cut it in the same direction all the time. So this would be the bottom of the skirt or the top of the blouse, whatever. But you have to cut all the pieces as if it was it is a napped fabric. So there's that kind. Then we have, this one is a lace. And this is how most sequin fabrics are done, is that they are sewn with a chain stitch from the back onto a mesh. And this is just a fine black, it's fine navy blue mesh. And this is the piece that I'm going to be using. And it's very pretty and it's very delicate. It does really nice for overlays. So, okay. And then a lot of times these laces have got a nice border on it. So this border, whenever you have a border on a lace or a sequin fabric, what you do is you cut out your pieces from the middle, and usually I will come to the end and I will cut this because this is a mesh, so therefore you don't have to worry about it running. And then I'm going to cut it out, and then because it is a knit, I can stretch it and put it around a neckline, a sleeve, to just finish the edges, and that's what I'm going to do. Usually it's on one side, the selvage side, they'll put the edging, and this is embroidered on. I did make a blouse out of this. This is leftovers, but I'm going to be making another one, and I'm going to line it in black. So this will be a new blouse that I've got cut out to stitch. Okay, then we have the glued fabrics, and as you see, it leaves a mess. So you have the glued fabrics, and this is on a piece of stretch velvet or velveteen. As you can see, here's the velveteen right there, or velour type fabric, but it's a knit velour. It has stretch in both directions, but more in one. And the sequins are just a thin layer of just mylar here. So, and they're glued on. So this is the glued one. The glued ones are easier to sew with, and they're also easier to cut out because you just treat it like regular fabric and cut it out with regular scissors. However, speaking of scissors, you don't want to cut this out with your best scissor because of the fact that it's going to ruin your scissor. So you don't want to use your best scissor here, or use a pair of shears that you're going to cut out and have them sharpened after you're done with the project. Sequin fabric can run anywhere from, say, I found it as cheap as $14.99 or as expensive as I found some years ago, because you can also have it interspaced with beading. And I've seen some of the beaded laces with the sequins on there, and those things can run you over $100 per yard as well. So you can get pretty much anything in between. And I got all of these from voguefabrics.com. So how to cut out a pattern. Usually you put your fabric face down with the sequin side down on a mat or a cutting board. I like to have a cutting table that has a cutting mat on it, because the cutting mat kind of grips the fabric, because this is very slippery on just an ordinary cutting table. And then let's just say this is our, let me get a piece of dark fabric underneath. Here's a piece of dark fabric. Okay, I'm just going to put it on top of this. You can pin it, however, this stuff is so slippery. You do better with fabric weights than you do with your pinning it. So what you would do is, if you were going to cut this out, you would take your pattern piece, and I'm just going to say I'm going to do this square, but it would be whatever piece you have. And you just, I usually take a chalk aligner and see, stitch it out, because see how it wants to move everywhere, and if you pin it, it can stretch and distort. So usually what I do is I chalk it out and then cut on the lines in order to cut. And usually when I'm cutting out my piece, I just cut it. I don't care where the sequins are. However, sometimes when you have a fabric, and here's the edge of it, right? Sometimes if you've got a straight line, it helps to just have your seam line right there and let the seam allowance go into this border area. So that's just less sequins you have to remove. I have a pair of scissors that I use just for sequin fabric, because that way I don't mess up my good scissors. Oh, the other thing is, because it's so very messy, it helps to have a dust buster in order to pick up the sequins as you're done. Okay, now here's different ways you can mark your seams. So what you have to do is, you do have to mark your seams, because everything outside of that seam has to be removed. You have to remove the sequins. Why? Because if this is a garment and this is going to rip your skin up, believe me, it is very irritating. Unless it is completely lined, and even if it is completely lined, you're going to have to remove the sequins right within the seam line, and then you have to sew them back afterwards. And this is the 3 ways of marking them. Most people will baste it by hand, which is an easy way to go, but it's hard to get it perfectly straight. Chalking it works, but the chalk goes away very quickly. And of course, this is not a straight seam line in the first place. This one I did with my sewing machine on the longest stitch length it could go, and I didn't care if it pierced the sequins, because I'm going to remove everything. So it's easy to remove the sequins. They're sewn from the back. So like this one here, you do need a good pair of reading glasses or even magnifying glasses in order to see what you're doing. I can see the lines, and these are usually stitched on with a chain stitch. So I know this is an isolated one, so I can just go ahead and remove this thread. Okay, there, I just pulled out that little line. This one is not a chain stitch, so this one you would need a seam ripper. So you could take the seam ripper, and this would take a long time to do. And it's really hard to see it. Okay, see, I'm taking it out, and it's not a chain stitch. So you could take the stitches out up to the seam. Okay. And then you're getting some whole sequins out of it. So you might want to save some of these, the whole ones, And that way you can, and leave the string, and you can actually, if you leave the threads, you can tie them. Oh, and this one, see, this one is a chain stitch. Watch what happens when I pull the chain stitch out. Yeah, see, all of the stitches, they came out. Well, they came out over here. I don't want them out over there. That's the problem. Out of the salvages, or the parts, the scraps that you have, I would pull the whole chain stitch just to collect enough sequins so that you can sew them back afterwards. So the other way of doing this, and this is how I usually do this, because they are almost always a chain stitch, is that from the right side, the easiest way is fold around your seam line, like your seam like this. Whatever sticks out, cut it in half, right through the middle of the hole, and the other side comes out easily. That is the easiest way to remove them, and just go along the seam line. If it's lined, if your garment is going to be lined, you do not have to do this except right along the stitching line, because this part right here would be encased. So I would just go along this line, and I'm gonna do that on one of these, and I will be right back because I cannot see it, and I've got to hold it really close under magnifier in order to do this. And I'm just taking them out right at the seam line. Okay, that way you're not breaking the thread and causing more to come out. You're just removing it there. Then if this were not going to be finished along the edge, so that this is not touching your skin, because this is going to cut, this part would cut your skin, is that you could come back later and then cut all of these out along the line. So you would just go along the line of where it's stitched, flip them on their side, and clip them out. Okay. If you don't, if you leave them in there and you cut them, and you sew them right over top of the sequins, your seam is not going to lay flat or fold over like you want. See here, I've removed it from this section right here. I don't know if you can see that, but I've removed it from this one section right here. And I'm going to go ahead, and actually what I'm going to be doing is making a purse. So therefore I'm going to snip them out of the seam line, and I will be back in a little bit. Okay, on this little purse that I'm making, what I did is I used KK2000 spray to temporarily adhere the sequin fabric to the lining fabric, and I just sewed it together just to make sure. So I have the seam already lined out in white right here. So what I did, if this will catch it on camera, I did remove all of the stitching from just inside that seam line where it's going to go. I didn't have to take it out of the edges, outside of the edges of the seams, because this is not a garment. If this were a garment that was just going to be seamed, then I would have removed it. When speaking of garments, you want to pick a pattern that's real simple in design. You don't want a lot of detail work, because that's a lot of seams that you've got to clear the sequins away from. You don't want to have darts or pockets or collars or anything complicated. With sequin fabric, simpler the better. The fabric is pretty spectacular by itself, so therefore you really don't have to have a lot of design to make a garment look good. But this is going to be for a little tote bag. So how you, now for this kind here, this is the one that's got the glued sequins on here. These are actually easier to remove, and actually a lot of times you don't have to remove them at all, simply because they're so thin they usually don't interfere with a seam. If they're thick enough to interfere with a seam, they're very easy to remove by simply taking a medium to hot iron. You have to test it for your background fabric. You don't need steam. Just touch it with the tip of the iron and see, it'll stick to the bottom of the iron. and it just rubs off. Just take a paper towel and just take them a couple at a time, and see, it'll stick, and rub it off. The disadvantage to this is you can't glue these back on. I don't, you know, you could possibly if you put them in a jar and then you put a little bit of KK2000 to re-adhere it, but you don't have to. They're very easy to remove with just an iron. And see it right there. And then just wipe it off and you're done. Okay. Now for sewing these, just use a regular needle. You don't need anything special. You're going to pick a needle determined by the background fabric. So if it's a woven, you can use either a universal or a sharp needle. If it's a knit, you can use a stretch or a ballpoint needle or a universal. If the needle works, then fine. Then you just go ahead and use it. You don't need anything special for it. If you're doing something with home dec and you're using something like that mermaid fabric where it's so thick and you don't worry about it being against any skin and you're not going to really turning any seams, then you can use a metallic needle or a jeans needle, denim needle, in order to sew through the heavy sequins. You're also going to realize you're never going to be able to use that needle for any other project, so that's it. So now I'm going to make this bag, and first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out a piece of foam interfacing, a thick heavy interfacing, and I'm going to just do a little bit of stitching inside of here. I don't know if I'm going to use metallic thread or just navy blue thread so it'll blend in, just to make, because this is kind of flimsy, it needs a little more body. So I'll be back after I do that. Okay, I finished this. Like I said, I just used regular needle. I used a universal needle and regular thread, and sewed it together. I put in a snap closure. Making this bag is not the scope of the class. It's working with the sequin fabrics, but I wasn't ready to make a whole blouse or anything yet, but it depends on what you want to do. I just made this cute little bag, and it'll match the blouse when I finish it. So this was simple to make. You can use any simple bag pattern. This is just a little evening clutch for whenever we go dancing. So that's all I have for you tonight. If you have any questions about sewing with fancy fabrics, you can send me an email at waltzquilt@yahoo.com. and I will be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss out on any future videos that I have. So that's all I have for you. See you next week. Thank you for watching. Bye.